I stared at the framed photo on my desk, the one Sophie had insisted I keep out instead of buried in storage. 4 faces grinned back at me from the hood of Mark's beat-up van, mountains stretching behind us under a cloudless sky. That was taken in Colorado, I think. Maybe Utah. The locations all blurred together after enough abandoned mines and ghost towns. 5 years. Hard to believe it had been that long since I'd done anything more adventurous than hiking the marked trails around Lake Michigan. Sophie liked those weekend trips, predictable paths with clear signs and designated camping spots. Safe. Nothing like the places we used to find. The urban exploration group had started simple enough. Mark and I met freshman year at Portland State, bonding over a shared fascination with abandoned buildings. He'd grown up sneaking into old warehouses. I just liked taking photos of decay and rust. We made a good team. His boldness balanced by my caution, though Mark would have called it paranoia. Emma came along junior year when she and Mark started dating. Where he saw adventure, she saw stories. She'd spend hours researching the history of places before we visited, arriving with notebooks full of dates and names. Every abandoned place was someone's home, she'd tell us, running her fingers along dusty windowsills. Someone's whole life happened here. David joined last, a grad student in history who overheard us planning a trip to an abandoned asylum. He showed up with topographical maps and a folder of property records, explaining exactly which buildings were structurally sound and which entries would keep us away from security patrols. Mark had rolled his eyes at first, but even he had to admit David's research kept us out of trouble more than once. For 3 years, we explored everything the Pacific Northwest had to offer. Abandoned hospitals with their empty operating theaters, factories where machinery stood frozen mid-production, hotels where guest registers still sat open on front desks, names from decades past waiting to check out. We documented it all. My photos, Emma's stories, David's maps, Mark's videos. Then Mark found the town. He'd been browsing some obscure Urbex forum when he came across a single post, barely 3 lines long. Someone claimed to know about an intact mining town in Nevada, completely abandoned since the 1950s. No name, just GPS coordinates and a warning that the access road didn't appear on any modern maps. "This is it," Mark had said, laptop open on my coffee table. "This is the one we've been looking for." I'd been skeptical. Anonymous posts usually led nowhere, or worse, to places crawling with security or other explorers. But David did his thing, cross-referencing the coordinates with old survey maps and mining claims. He found traces, references to a settlement that had produced silver and copper until all record of it simply stopped in 1952. No bankruptcy filing, no formal closure, David had explained, adjusting his glasses. Towns don't just vanish from records like this. Emma had been quiet during the planning, which should have been my first warning. She usually got excited about the historical research, but for this trip she just nodded along. When I asked if she was okay, she'd given me a strange look. "Do you ever think some places want to be forgotten?" she'd asked. I hadn't known how to answer that. The drive from Portland took 14 hours. We left on a Thursday night, taking turns behind the wheel of Mark's van while the others slept among our gear. Sleeping bags, camping stoves, enough food and water for a week, cameras, flashlights, first aid supplies, rope, bolt cutters. We'd learned to prepare for anything. The GPS led us through Nevada's empty stretches, past Reno, and into the kind of nowhere that made you understand why they tested bombs out here. Somewhere around dawn, we turned off the highway onto a dirt road that my phone insisted didn't exist. For 2 hours, we drove through landscape that looked like Mars. Red rocks and sparse brush under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. The road deteriorated from dirt to barely visible tire tracks. Twice we had to get out and walk ahead to make sure we weren't about to drive off a hidden drop-off. Then we crested a rise, and there it was. The town sat in a natural bowl between rust-colored hills, maybe 30 buildings, clustered around what had once been a main street. Even from a distance, I could see the church steeple tilting at an impossible angle, like a finger pointing accusingly at the sky. "Holy shit," Mark breathed. "It's perfect." Perfect wasn't the word I would have used. Preserved, maybe. Waiting. We drove down slowly, the van's engine seeming too loud in the morning, quiet. The buildings grew larger as we approached. Two-story structures with false fronts meant to make them look grander. Miners' cabins with their roofs half collapsed. What might have been a general store with its windows dark and empty. Mark parked in front of the largest building, a 3-story structure with hotel still visible and faded paint above the entrance. We sat for a moment, nobody moving. "Well," David finally said, "we're here." The silence when we stepped out was complete. No birds, no insects, no wind. Just our footsteps crunching on dirt that hadn't seen rain in who knows how long. The morning sun created pools of darkness between buildings that seemed too deep for the hour. "Let's set up base camp first," I suggested, pulling my camera bag from the van. "Check the hotel, see if it's stable enough to sleep in." The hotel's front door hung open, revealing a lobby thick with dust. Our flashlight beams cut through the gloom, illuminating a front desk with its register still in place. Chairs arranged as if waiting for guests who would never arrive. A staircase curved up into darkness. "Looks solid," Mark announced after checking the support beams. "Better than sleeping outside." We hauled our gear in, choosing a large room on the ground floor that might have been a dining area. The tables were gone, but marks on the floor showed where they'd stood. Emma spread out her sleeping bag in one corner, while David immediately began sketching a map of the town layout. I couldn't shake the need to document everything immediately, as if it might disappear when we weren't looking. While the others set up camp, I wandered the hotel with my camera. Guest rooms stood open on the second floor, beds still made with quilts gray from dust. In one room, clothes hung in the wardrobe, a woman's dress, a man's work clothes, a child's shoes lined up beneath. The third floor felt different, colder, despite the rising desert heat. The hallway stretched longer than seemed possible for the building's doors standing open to rooms that looked identical. At the far end, one door remained closed. I reached for the handle, then stopped. Something about that door made me want to leave it alone. Back downstairs, I found the others examining a stack of newspapers David had discovered behind the front desk. The Nevada Daily dated through 1952, headlines growing stranger as the dates progressed. "Third family disappears without trace," Emma read. "Sheriff calls for state investigation." "Mine foreman claims to hear voices in lower shafts," David added. "Company denies safety concerns." The last paper was dated October 15, 1952. The headline simply read, "Where is everyone?" "Okay, that's creepy as hell," I said, photographing the front page. Mark laughed, but it sounded forced in the empty lobby. "Come on, it's probably just economic collapse. Mine played out, people moved on. Happens all the time." "Leaving everything behind?" Emma asked. "Even their clothes?" "Maybe they were in a hurry." Mark shrugged, but I caught him glancing toward the stairs. "Look, we wanted authentic. We got authentic. This is what we came for." We spent the rest of the day exploring the town in pairs. Mark and Emma took the eastern section while David and I went west. Every building told the same story. Lives interrupted, belongings abandoned, dust settling over scenes that felt staged rather than lived in. The church was the worst. Hymn books still sat in pews open to "Nearer, My God, to Thee." Children's drawings covered one wall, crayon pictures of families and houses and something else. Dark shapes with too many angles that hurt to look at directly. "Mining accident, maybe," David suggested, studying the drawings. "Trauma manifesting in their art." I photographed everything, trying to capture what felt wrong about it all. In the afternoon light, shadows fell in directions that didn't match the sun. Doorways seemed to lead deeper than the buildings should allow. And underneath it all, a feeling of being watched made me check over my shoulder constantly. By evening, we'd regrouped at the hotel. Mark had found the mine entrance at the town's northern edge, though a partial collapse blocked any exploration. Emma had discovered the schoolhouse with lessons still written on the blackboard, arithmetic problems that didn't quite add up correctly. We made dinner on our camping stoves, the smell of rehydrated pasta strange in the dusty hotel. As darkness approached, We moved outside to escape the heavy atmosphere, setting up chairs around a small fire Mark built in the street. To the find of a lifetime, Mark toasted, raising his beer. We clinked bottles, but the celebration felt hollow. The stars emerged with desert clarity, the Milky Way a river of light above the dark buildings. I set up my tripod for some long exposures, using the church steeple as foreground. "I don't like it here," Emma said suddenly. We all turned to look at her. She sat hunched in her chair, arms wrapped around herself despite the fire's warmth. "What do you mean?" Mark asked. "Can't you feel it? Like we're being watched, like the town doesn't want us here." David nodded slowly. "I've felt it too. Probably just the isolation, the silence. Our brains aren't used to this level of quiet. It's not just that." Emma stared into the fire. "When I was in the schoolhouse, I could have sworn I heard, I don't know, whispering, like children talking in the next room, but there was no next room." "Could be wind through the boards," I offered, though I'd noticed the complete absence of wind all day. "Yeah, maybe." She didn't sound convinced. Mark reached over and squeezed her shoulder. "Hey, we've explored dozens of places. They all feel weird at first. By tomorrow, it'll just be another dead town with a sad story." I wanted to agree with him. This was what we did. Found places forgotten by time, documented them, shared their stories. But something about this town felt different. The abandonment was too complete, too sudden. And there was something else, something I couldn't quite name. We stayed by the fire until the cold drove us inside. In the hotel, we laid out our sleeping bags in the dining room, nobody suggesting we split up into the guest rooms. Mark and Emma curled together near one wall. David took a corner where he could see both entrances, and I set up near the windows. "First one up makes coffee," Mark called out as we settled in. "Deal," I replied, though I doubted I'd sleep much. The hotel creaked around us as temperatures dropped, wood contracting with sharp pops that made us all jump. Our flashlights created a small island of light in the vast darkness. Outside, the abandoned town waited. I lay awake for hours. Listening to the others' breathing slowly deepened into sleep. Every sound seemed amplified. David's occasional snore, Emma murmuring something unintelligible, the rustle of sleeping bags as someone shifted position. Then, at what my watch said was 3:17 a.m., I heard it. Crying. Distant and muffled like someone weeping behind closed doors. I sat up, straining to locate the source. It seemed to come from above. Maybe the second floor, maybe farther. The sound rose and fell, deeply human in its grief. I grabbed my flashlight but didn't turn it on yet. The crying continued, joined by what might have been words, though I couldn't make them out. My rational mind offered explanations: wind through broken windows, animals, the acoustic tricks of an empty building. But my gut knew better. The sound faded gradually, leaving me wide awake and hyper-alert. I wanted to wake the others, but what would I say? That I'd heard someone crying in an abandoned hotel? They'd think I was letting Emma's unease get to me. I lay back down, but kept my flashlight in my hand. The hotel settled into silence again, but now it felt expectant rather than empty. Whatever had made that sound, I was certain of one thing. We weren't as alone as we thought. The rest of the night crawled by. I dozed fitfully, starting awake at every creak and pop. When pale light finally filtered through the dusty windows, I'd never been so grateful to see dawn. I woke to David shaking my shoulder, his face exhausted. The morning light coming through the hotel's grimy windows had that thin quality that meant it was barely past dawn. My back hurt from sleeping on the hard floor, and my mouth tasted like I'd been chewing on the dust that coated everything in this place. "Coffee," David croaked, gesturing toward the camping stove he'd already set up near our pile of gear. I sat up, noticing Emma and Mark still tangled together in their sleeping bags. She'd finally fallen asleep maybe an hour ago, after spending most of the night moving restlessly. The crying I'd heard at 3:17 a.m. still repeated in my head, though I hadn't mentioned it to anyone. While the water heated, I stepped outside to stretch. The town looked different in the early light, less menacing, more melancholy. The tilted church steeple caught the first rays of sun, and for a moment I could almost imagine this place alive. Miners heading to their shifts, children playing in the dusty streets. David joined me with 2 cups of instant coffee that tasted like burnt rubber but felt like salvation going down. "You get any sleep?" I asked. He shrugged. Some kept thinking I heard things. Like what? Nothing specific, just sounds that shouldn't be there. He adjusted his glasses, a nervous habit I'd noticed over the years. This place has terrible acoustics. Sound carries weird in the desert. I nodded, though we both knew that wasn't quite it. The silence here wasn't natural. It was too complete, like the town existed in a bubble separate from the rest of the world. By the time Mark and Emma emerged, the sun had climbed higher, burning off the morning chill. Emma looked pale, dark circles under her eyes making her seem fragile. She managed a weak smile when I handed her coffee, but I caught the way her hands trembled slightly as she wrapped them around the cup. "All right, team," Mark announced, stretching dramatically. "Day 2 in paradise. I'm thinking we split up, cover more ground. Mike, you and David take the administrative buildings. Town hall, maybe a bank if they had one. Emma and I will check out the residential area, see what stories those houses have to tell." Emma's face tightened at the suggestion, but she didn't protest. I wanted to suggest we stick together, but Mark was already pulling out his camera, checking battery levels with the focused energy that meant his mind was made up. David had sketched a rough map of the town based on our exploration yesterday, marking buildings by probable function. The administrative section clustered around what might have been the main square, though any fountain or monument had long since crumbled to rubble. "Meet back here for lunch," Mark suggested. "Say, 1 o'clock?" We agreed, though something in Emma's expression made me want to change the plan. But she was already following Mark toward the residential streets, her camera bag slung over one shoulder. David and I headed in the opposite direction, our footsteps unnaturally loud in the morning quiet. The first building we entered had probably been the town hall, a 2-story structure with tall windows and what was left of official-looking furniture. Desks stood in neat rows in the main room, papers still stacked on some of them. "Look at this," David called from behind one desk. He held up a ledger, its pages yellow and brittle. "Tax records, looks like, all the way up to October 1952. I photographed him holding the book, then took close-ups of the pages, names and amounts in fading ink, the mundane business of a town that didn't know it was about to die. The upper floor held offices, each one a snapshot of interrupted work, in what must have been the mayor's office. A calendar on the wall still showed October 1952. Someone had crossed off days up to the 14th. The 15th, the date of that last newspaper, remained unmarked. "Mike." David's voice came from down the hall, tight with something I couldn't identify. I found him in a small office at the back of the building, staring at the wall behind an overturned desk. Someone had written on it, the words carved deep into the plaster. "They come from below the children, hear them first." God help us all. The letters were uneven, desperate, below them scratched in what might have been a different hand. "Don't let them take you down." "Mining accident," David said, but his usual academic certainty was missing. "Has to be. Gas leak, maybe. Hallucinations." I photographed the wall from different angles, trying to capture the raw fear in those carved words. The room felt colder than the others, and I found myself backing toward the door without meaning to. We spent the rest of the morning documenting the administrative buildings. The bank vault stood open, money still in the drawers, another sign of how quickly everyone had left, or been taken. A voice in my head whispered, but I pushed that thought away. The post office was the strangest. Mail sat sorted in boxes, never to be delivered. I pulled out a few letters, feeling like a grave robber. Most were boring. Bills, personal letters, a Sears catalog. But one envelope, addressed to someone in Reno, had been opened and resealed. Inside, a single sheet of paper with one line. "If you're reading this, don't come looking for us." By the time we headed back to the hotel for lunch, the sun had reached its peak, beating down hard. David and I compared notes as we walked, trying to piece together a timeline from the documents we'd found. Everything pointed to a gradual escalation of something, through September and early October. Then sudden silence. Emma and Mark were already at the hotel when we arrived. Emma sat on the steps, knees drawn up to her chest, while Mark paced in front of her. "You okay?" I asked, sitting down beside her. She looked at me with those green eyes that usually sparkled with curiosity, but now seemed haunted. I heard them again. Heard what? Children. Laughing. Her voice was barely above a whisper. We were in this house, perfectly preserved, toys still on the floor, like they'd just stepped out. And I heard them, Mike, clear as day. Children playing in the next room. Mark stopped pacing. I checked every room. There was nothing. I know what I heard. Emma's jaw set in that stubborn way I recognized. It wasn't wind. It wasn't the building settling. It was children. David sat down on her other side. The mind can play tricks in places like this. Pareidolia, seeing patterns that aren't there, or in this case, hearing them. Emma shook her head but didn't argue further. We ate lunch in relative silence. Everyone lost in their own thoughts. The sandwiches tasted like cardboard, and even Mark's usual enthusiasm seemed dampened. After lunch, we decided to check out the mine entrance together. The walk to the town's northern edge took us past more abandoned houses, their empty windows watching our passage. The landscape opened up as we climbed a slight rise, revealing the scarred hillside where mining operations had carved into the earth. The main entrance was exactly as Mark had described, a timber-framed opening partially blocked by fallen rocks. Rails emerged from the darkness, disappearing into the collapse about 20 feet in. Warning signs, faded but still readable, proclaimed danger in 3 languages. Typical setup for the era, David explained, examining the entrance. They'd have multiple levels going down following the ore veins, probably connected to natural cave systems too. I took photos while being careful not to get too close to the unstable-looking rocks. The darkness beyond the collapse seemed absolute, swallowing our flashlight beams when we tried to peer deeper. "Think we could clear some of these rocks?" Mark asked, already reaching for a smaller stone. "Don't!" Emma's voice was sharp. "Please, just don't." Mark pulled his hand back, frowning. "It's just rocks, Em." "No, it's not." She stared at the mine entrance like it might swallow us whole. "Can't you feel it?" "There's something wrong here. More wrong than the rest of the town." I felt it too, though I couldn't have explained it. The mine entrance radiated a kind of wrongness, like looking at an optical illusion that wouldn't resolve. The air near it felt heavier, colder despite the afternoon sun. Mining accidents were common, David said, but he'd taken several steps back from the entrance, especially in operations this size. Cave-ins, gas pockets, underground water, any number of things could have gone wrong. All at once, Emma challenged. The whole town abandoned because of one accident. "Maybe it was that bad," Mark suggested, though even he seemed subdued by the mine's oppressive atmosphere. Maybe they broke into something they shouldn't have. The words hung in the air, uncomfortably close to what I'd been thinking. We stood there for another few minutes, nobody willing to get closer to the entrance but somehow reluctant to leave. Finally, Emma turned and started walking back toward town. The rest of us followed, Mark looking back at the mine one last time. The afternoon passed quietly. We explored a few more buildings together, but the energy had gone out of our investigation. Every shadow seemed deeper, every empty room more oppressive. Even Mark's jokes fell flat. As evening approached, we gathered wood for another fire. The simple task felt good, something normal in this decidedly abnormal place. We'd just gotten the fire started when it happened. The church bell rang. 3 clear notes ringing across the abandoned town. We all froze. I watched the church steeple, visible over the rooftops, but saw no movement. The bell rang 3 more times, then fell silent. Wind. David suggested weakly. There is no wind, Emma whispered. She was right. The air was perfectly still, our fire smoke rising straight up. I'd photographed that bell yesterday. The mechanism was rusted solid, the rope rotted away. There was no way it could ring, but it had. Okay, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. I think maybe we should consider heading out tomorrow. We've documented plenty and... One more day, Mark interrupted. Just one. We need to check out the church properly, and there might be more to find in the mine area. Mark, Emma started. One day, he insisted. We drove 14 hours to get here. We can't leave without fully exploring it. When are we ever going to find something like this again? I wanted to argue, but I knew that look. Mark in full stubborn mode was immovable, and part of me, the part that had spent years seeking out abandoned places, wanted to know what was in that church too. Fine, I agreed. But we stick together tomorrow, no splitting up. Deal, Mark said quickly, probably sensing that was the best compromise he'd get. We went inside as darkness fell, setting up our sleeping bags in the same positions as the night before. Nobody suggested trying the guest rooms. The hotel felt less welcoming tonight, its shadows deeper, its silence more oppressive. David volunteered to take first watch. I'm not tired anyway, he said, though the dark circles under his eyes suggested otherwise. I lay in my sleeping bag, camera beside me, listening to the others settle in. Emma and Mark whispered to each other, too quiet for me to make out words. Eventually, their breathing deepened into sleep. That's when the walkie-talkies started. We'd brought them for emergency communication, leaving them on in case we got separated. They sat in a pile with our other gear, turned to the same channel, volume low. The static started first, rising and falling in waves. Then beneath it, voices. Not clear enough to understand, but definitely voices. Multiple people talking. Their words lost in the electronic hiss. David was already moving toward them when I sat up. He picked up one unit, adjusting the squelch, trying to clear the signal. The voices grew clearer, but no more comprehensible. They spoke in unison sometimes, then separated into what sounded like a conversation. The language was wrong, not foreign exactly, but twisted somehow. Like English played backward and forward at the same time. Radio interference, David muttered, but his hands shook as he tried different channels. The voices followed, growing louder. I grabbed another walkie-talkie, turning it off. The voices continued from the others. We looked at each other, then quickly shut down all the units. Silence. Atmospheric conditions, David said, bouncing signals from who knows where. Desert plays havoc with radio waves. I nodded, not believing it any more than he did. We sat in the darkness, neither of us suggesting we try to sleep. Somewhere in the hotel, wood creaked. Outside, the abandoned town waited. Hours passed. David and I took turns dozing, one always awake and alert. The hotel's sound seemed louder in the darkness. Settling wood, the whisper of wind through broken windows and underneath it all. Something that might have been breathing but was probably just our imagination. Sometime after midnight, the sound started. Not from one direction, but several, as if the town itself was sighing. Low, mournful notes that could have been wind through empty buildings but sounded too much like voices. They rose and fell, sometimes almost forming words, always just beyond understanding. Emma woke sitting up suddenly. Do you hear that? Just the buildings. Mark mumbled, still half asleep. Old wood, temperature changes. But Emma was already crying, silent tears running down her cheeks. I moved closer, not sure what comfort I could offer. The sounds continued, surrounding us as if the entire town was mourning something lost long ago. It's so sad, Emma whispered. Whatever happened here, they're still sad about it. I wanted to tell her it was just noise, just the natural sounds of an old empty place. But sitting there in the darkness, listening to those sad voices, I couldn't make myself lie. David kept watch, his face grim in the flashlight's glow. Mark held Emma, whispering reassurances that sounded hollow. And I sat with my camera, wondering what we'd stumbled into and whether Mark's insistence on one more day would be something we'd all regret. The sounds continued until dawn, rising and falling like a tide of grief. When the first light finally crept through the windows, we were all awake, exhausted, and deeply bothered. One more day, I told myself. Just one more day, and then we could leave this place to its ghosts. But looking at my friends' drawn faces, I wondered if one more day might be one too many. Morning brought heavy fog to the town, thick and unnatural for the desert. It pressed against the hotel windows like something alive, reducing visibility to maybe 20 feet. I stood on the front steps, camera in hand, trying to capture how the mist transformed the abandoned buildings into vague, hulking shapes. The fog muffled sound even more than usual, creating a silence so complete it felt like pressure in my ears. Inside, the others were finishing breakfast, instant oatmeal that tasted like cardboard, but at least filled our stomachs. Mark had been unusually quiet since waking, studying David's hand-drawn map with an intensity that made me nervous. He'd already been out once this morning, returning with damp hair and an excited gleam in his eyes that I recognized from past discoveries. "Found something interesting," he announced, tapping a section of the map. "There's a house on the eastern edge set back from the others." "David, you didn't mark any cellar entrance for it." David leaned over to look, adjusting his glasses. I mapped what I could see from the outside. "Some of these places, the foundations have shifted so much that this one's different." Mark interrupted, already packing his gear. "The foundation's actually sinking into the ground. Looks like the whole house is being swallowed. But here's the thing. I saw hinges, metal hinges, on what should be solid foundation." Emma set down her coffee cup harder than necessary. "We agreed to check the church today. Together. We will. This won't take long." Mark was already heading for the door. "Just want to see what's down there." I caught Emma's expression, a mixture of fear and resignation I'd seen too many times before. She knew arguing with Mark in exploration mode was pointless. David was already folding his map, preparing to follow. After a moment, Emma grabbed her jacket. The fog made navigation difficult. We moved slowly through the streets, using the tilted church steeple as a landmark when it appeared through gaps in the mist. The houses on the eastern edge sat farther apart, as if the builders had wanted distance from their neighbors, or from something else. Mark's discovery stood alone at the settlement's boundary, where the town gave way to empty desert. The house itself was unremarkable. Single-story, wood-frame construction typical of mining towns. But Mark was right about the foundation. The entire structure listed to one side, its base disappearing into earth that looked disturbed, almost churned. "Sinkhole," David suggested, but his voice lacked conviction. "Look at the angle," Mark said, already circling the building. "And here, see?" He pointed to what I'd first thought was decoration on the foundation stones. Metal hinges, green with age but solid, attached to what looked like a section of the foundation itself. The edges were too regular to be natural, too deliberate to be accident. "It's a door," I said, raising my camera. "Built into the foundation." "Hidden," Emma corrected, "well back from the house. Hidden for a reason." Mark was already pulling out his pry bar. The door had no visible handle or lock mechanism, just those hinges and a barely visible seam in the stone. He wedged the bar into the gap, putting his weight behind it. "Maybe we should think about this," David suggested. "Document it first. Research." The door popped open with a grinding sound that made us all step back. Air rushed out, stale and cold and carrying a smell like wet copper. Beyond the opening, wooden stairs went down into darkness. "Basement," Mark said, but even he sounded uncertain. The stairs looked wrong, too steep, too narrow, extending down farther than a normal cellar would require. I played my flashlight over the entrance. The walls were stone for the first few feet, then transitioned to packed earth supported by wooden beams. The construction looked different from the rest of the town, newer despite the age-darkened wood. "Those locks." Emma pointed to the inside of the door. Heavy iron fixtures, multiple bolts that would have secured it from within. Someone wanted to keep people out or keep something in. David finished. Mark was already going down, headlamp cutting through the darkness. I followed, partly to document whatever we found, mostly because I didn't want him going alone. The stairs creaked under our weight but held. Behind me I heard David convincing Emma to wait outside, then his footsteps following us down. The stairs ended in a small chamber, maybe 10 feet square. The walls were reinforced with newer timbers, the kind of construction you'd see in a mine shaft. But this wasn't a mine. The floor was packed earth except for one corner, where someone had installed what looked like a metal grate. "Storage cellar?" I suggested, photographing the space. Mark was already looking at the grate. "No. Look at this." The metal covered an opening about 3 feet square. Below it, darkness that our lights couldn't reach. But that wasn't what made my skin crawl. The grate was secured with padlocks, modern ones, maybe 20 years old at most. Someone had been here long after the town was abandoned. "We need to see what's down there," Mark said, already working on the locks with his tools. "Mark, stop." David's voice was sharp. "This isn't like the other buildings. Someone went to a lot of trouble to seal this. Exactly why we need to look." The first lock popped open. This is what we came for. Real mysteries, not just empty houses. I wanted to agree with David, but curiosity won. Whatever was down there, someone had thought it important enough to secure decades after the town died. The second lock fell away. Then the third. Mark lifted the grate, revealing rough stone walls going down into blackness. "It's a tunnel," he breathed. Not just a tunnel, a passage carved from solid rock angling down at a steep grade. The walls showed tool marks, but crude ones, as if dug in a hurry or desperation. Wooden supports appeared every few yards, some original, others clearly added later. "Mining tunnel?" David suggested. He didn't sound convinced. "Wrong direction," Mark said, already swinging his legs over the edge. "The mine's north. This goes east, toward nothing." Emma's voice came from above. She'd followed us down despite David's suggestion and now stood at the chamber entrance, face pale in our headlamp beams. "There's nothing out there but desert. Only one way to find out." Mark dropped into the tunnel, landing with a thud. "Solid ground. Come on." I looked at David, who shrugged with resignation. We'd come this far. I lowered myself down, camera bag carefully protected. The tunnel was just tall enough to stand upright, just wide enough for single file. David came next, then helped Emma down despite her obvious reluctance. The passage angled downward more steeply than I'd expected. Our headlamps created a bubble of light that made the darkness ahead seem even more absolute. The walls were rough, catching our clothes as we moved. Every 20 feet or so, timber supports groaned under the weight of earth above. "This isn't safe," David muttered, examining one particularly warped beam. "It's held this long," Mark called back, already 30 feet ahead. The temperature dropped as we descended. My breath started misting in the headlamp beam. The smell changed too. Less dust, more mineral, with an undertone of something organic I couldn't identify. Sulfur, maybe, though that made no sense this far from volcanic activity. We'd gone maybe a quarter mile when the first sound reached us. Distant, muffled but unmistakably deliberate. A wailing that rose and fell in patterns too regular to be natural. Emma grabbed my arm. "We need to go back now." "It's just air movement," Mark said, but he'd stopped walking. "Pressure differences in the tunnel system." "That's not wind," Emma insisted. "Listen to it. That's voices." She was right. The wailing had a quality that suggested words, though in no language I recognized. It came from ahead, deeper in the tunnel, rising and falling like a conversation or argument carried on by inhuman throats. "We're going back," David decided. "This is beyond what we're equipped for." 5 more minutes, Mark bargained, just to see what's making that sound. "Then we leave." "Mark," I started. 5 minutes, he repeated, already moving forward. "We've come this far." I followed, hating myself for it. Behind me, David cursed but kept pace. Emma's breathing had gone shallow, scared, but she stayed with us. The tunnel continued downward and the wailing grew louder, not clearer. If anything, the sounds became more distorted as we approached, as if whatever made them wasn't designed for human ears to understand. The sulfur smell got stronger. My eyes watered even with the cold. The timber supports showed more damage here. Some cracked nearly through, others bulging inward as if the earth was trying to reclaim the passage. "Look at this." Mark's voice came from ahead, tight with excitement or fear. The tunnel opened into a wider space, not quite a room, more like a natural cavity someone had broken into. Our lights played over walls that weren't carved but formed, showing the smooth curves and mineral deposits of a natural cave system. But that wasn't what made us all stop. The far wall was covered in writing, not carved like the desperate message in the town hall, but painted in something dark that had lasted decades. The symbols weren't English, weren't anything I recognized. They hurt to look at directly, as if my brain couldn't quite process their angles. "What is that?" David whispered. Before anyone could answer, the wailing stopped. The silence hit hard, making my ears ring. Then, from somewhere deeper in the cave system, came a different sound. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, getting closer. "Out," Emma said. "Out now." For once, Mark didn't argue. We turned as one, heading back toward the tunnel entrance. But we'd only made it a few yards when the first timber support cracked. It happened fast. The wood splintered with a sound like a gunshot. Earth began trickling from above, then pouring. The tunnel shook, a deep rumble that I felt in my chest. "Run!" David shouted. We ran. Behind us, more supports failed in sequence, each crack followed by the thunder of falling earth. My headlamp beam bounced crazily as I sprinted, showing glimpses of tunnel, walls, the others' backs. Emma was ahead of me, David behind, Mark in the lead where he always was. Another support failed, this one directly overhead. I threw myself forward as wood and earth crashed down where I'd been standing. Dust filled the air, making it impossible to see more than a few feet. The rumbling grew louder, not just behind us now, but all around, as if the entire tunnel system was failing. "Keep moving." Mark's voice barely audible over the collapse. I stumbled, caught myself, kept running. My lungs burned from the dust and exertion. Somewhere behind us, that inhuman wailing started again, as if the collapse had awakened something. Then it happened. The section of tunnel ahead of Mark gave way all at once. Not a gradual failure, but a complete, instantaneous collapse. One moment he was running, the next he was gone, buried under tons of earth and stone. Mark, Emma's scream cut through the rumbling. I skidded to a stop just short of the collapse. Where Mark had been was now a wall of debris still shifting and settling. Through the dust, I could see a gap near the floor, maybe 2 feet high, and in that gap, movement. "Help me." Mark's voice muffled and desperate. "I can't move my legs." I dropped to my knees, clawing at the debris. Rocks came away in my hands, but more shifted to take their place. Through the gap, I could see Mark's face twisted in pain and terror. Blood ran from a gash on his forehead. "My legs," he gasped. "Something's on my legs. Get it off." David was beside me now, both of us digging frantically. But for every rock we moved, the pile shifted, threatening to close the gap entirely. Behind us, more of the tunnel was failing. The wailing had become screaming. Closer now, as if whatever made those sounds was racing the collapse. "We have to go," David said, grabbing my shoulder. "The whole thing's coming down. We can't leave him." I pulled free, reaching through the gap. Mark's hand found mine, gripping with desperate strength. "Please," he begged. "Don't leave me here, please." I could see more now as my eyes adjusted. The rocks hadn't just trapped his legs, they'd crushed them. Blood pooled around his lower body. Too much blood. Even if we could move the debris, I wasn't sure he'd survive. "Mike," David's voice was urgent. "We have to go now." Another section collapsed behind us. Emma was sobbing, pulling at rocks with bloody fingers. The gap was getting smaller as the pile settled. Mark's grip on my hand was weakening. "I'm sorry," I said, the words tearing from my throat. "I'm so sorry." "Don't," Mark whispered. "Don't leave me. Not here, not with them." The wailing was right behind us now. In the darkness beyond the collapse, something moved. Something that wasn't quite the right shape, wasn't quite the right size. Mark saw it too. His eyes went wide and he screamed, not in pain but in absolute terror. David grabbed me, pulling with all his strength. "Now." I let go of Mark's hand. Let David drag me away as the gap closed, cutting off Mark's screams. We ran Emma between us as the tunnel died behind us. The collapse chased us, always just yards behind, bringing darkness and that horrible wailing that might have been Mark's voice mixed with something else. We reached the vertical shaft just as the last supports gave way. David boosted Emma up, then me. I hauled myself out of the tunnel as the rumbling reached a crescendo. David's hands appeared on the edge and I grabbed them, pulling with strength I didn't know I had. He came up just as the tunnel mouth collapsed completely, ejecting a cloud of dust and the stench of sulfur. We lay on the cellar floor, gasping, covered in dirt and Mark's blood. Below us, the rumbling continued for long seconds before finally fading. Then silence, broken only by Emma's hysterical sobbing. Mark was gone, buried under tons of rock in a tunnel that shouldn't have existed, in a town that wanted to be forgotten. And as I lay there trying to process what had happened, I could still hear those inhuman wails echoing up from the depths, carrying Mark's screams with them into the dark. I stumbled out of the cellar, my legs barely holding me up. The fog had lifted while we were underground, replaced by harsh afternoon sun that made me squint. Emma collapsed on the dead grass beside the house, her whole body shaking with sobs that came from somewhere deep and broken. David stood frozen at the cellar entrance, staring down at the sealed shaft like he could will it to open again. My hands were torn and bleeding from clawing at rocks. Mark's blood had mixed with the dirt under my fingernails, creating dark crescents I couldn't stop staring at. The image of his terrified face through that gap kept replaying the moment he realized we were going to leave him. "We need help," David said, his voice flat and mechanical. "Emergency services, search and rescue." I pulled out my phone with shaking fingers. No signal. Of course not. We were in the middle of nowhere, in a town that didn't officially exist. I tried anyway, walking in circles, holding the phone high, desperate for even one bar. "Nothing," I said. Emma's sobs had quieted to ragged breathing. She sat up, dirt streaking the tears on her face. "We have to go back down. We have to try again." "Emma," David started. "We can't leave him." She was on her feet, already moving toward the cellar. "He's still down there." "What if he's still?" "He's not," I said, hating how the words sounded. "You saw how much blood? You don't know that." She spun on me, eyes wild. "You let go of his hand. You left him." The accusation hit like a physical blow. Because she was right, I had let go. I had chosen to save myself while Mark screamed for help. The tunnel was collapsing. David said quietly, "We all would have died. Then we should have." Emma's voice cracked. "We should have stayed with him." I wanted to argue, to defend myself, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I looked at the house, at the disturbed earth around its foundation. Whatever we'd found down there, whatever had made those sounds, it felt like the town itself had swallowed Mark whole. "The nearest town is Elko," David said, pulling out his map with shaking hands. "About 30 miles north, they'll have emergency services, proper equipment." Emma was already heading back to the cellar. I caught up with her at the entrance, grabbing her arm as she started down the stairs. "Emma, wait. We need to be smart about this." "Smart?" She laughed, but it sounded more like a sob. "We were never smart. We came to this place, we opened that door, we went down that tunnel, and now Mark is..." She couldn't finish. "Let me go back down," I said. "Just me." To check. David appeared beside us, not alone. We stick together. We went down the stairs again, moving slowly this time. The small chamber looked exactly as we'd left it. The open grate, our footprints in the dust. But when I shined my light down the shaft, my heart sank. The tunnel entrance was completely blocked, not just partially collapsed like before, but sealed with debris packed so tight it looked like solid stone. "Mark!" Emma screamed down the shaft. "Mark, can you hear me?" Only silence answered. We tried anyway, found pieces of wood from the house above, tried to shore up the edges of the shaft. David and I took turns climbing down, trying to dig through the blockage. But every rock we moved caused more to shift, and after an hour we'd barely made a dent. "It's getting worse," David said after his third attempt. "The whole thing is unstable. We keep digging, we'll bring the rest of it down." I made one more trip down, pressing my face against the debris, listening for any sound. Nothing. No wailing, no footsteps, no mark. Just the occasional groan of settling earth. When I climbed back up, Emma was sitting against the wall, staring at nothing. "He's gone, isn't he?" I couldn't speak, just nodded. "We need to get help," David said. "Real help. Recovery equipment. Professionals who know what they're doing." The walk back to the hotel felt like a funeral march. We packed our gear in silence, throwing everything into the van without careful organization. Emma sat in the back, Mark's camera bag clutched to her chest. I drove, my hands still shaking on the wheel. The 30 miles to Elko stretched forever. Desert and scrubland blurred past, but all I could see was Mark's face in that gap, the terror in his eyes when he saw whatever was in the darkness behind him. What had he seen? What were those things that made sounds no human throat could produce? Elko appeared like a mirage. Gas stations, fast food restaurants, normal life continuing as if our world hadn't just broken apart. I pulled into the first gas station and asked for directions to the police station. The Elko County Sheriff's Office was a low concrete building. We walked in covered in dirt and blood, probably looking like we'd crawled out of our own graves. The deputy at the desk took one look at us and called for backup. Sheriff Coleman was a weathered man in his 50s who listened to our story with professional calm. We told him about the abandoned town, the hidden cellar, the tunnel collapse. We left out the sounds, the writing on the cave wall, the feeling that something else was down there with Mark. Just a tragic accident during urban exploration. "This town," Coleman said, studying his map. "You said it's about 40 miles southeast?" "There's no road on the maps," David explained. "We followed directions from an online forum." Coleman's expression tightened. "I need exact coordinates. GPS if you have it." I pulled up the location on my phone, showing him the pin I'd dropped when we first arrived. He studied it, then made several phone calls. I caught fragments. "Recovery operation. Unstable mine shaft, 1 casualty. I'm assembling a team," Coleman said when he hung up. "Search and rescue some folks from the Mining Safety Board. We'll head out at first light." "First light." Emma stood up so fast her chair tipped over. "He's down there now." He could still be, "Ma'am, I understand you're upset, but sending people into an unstable tunnel at night would just risk more lives. We'll set out at dawn with proper equipment and personnel." Emma looked like she might argue more, but David put a gentle hand on her shoulder. She crumpled, fresh tears streaming down her face. Coleman took our statements separately, asking for every detail about the collapse. When he interviewed me, I almost told him about the sounds, about what Mark had seen in the darkness. But looking at his practical, no-nonsense face, I kept quiet. He wouldn't believe me anyway. He recommended a motel on the edge of town, gave us his direct number, and promised to call as soon as they returned from the site. We drove there in silence, checked into 2 rooms, one for Emma, one for David and me. I stood in the shower for 20 minutes, watching Mark's blood swirl down the drain. When I finally got out, I found David sitting on his bed staring at his hands. "We left him," he said quietly. "We had to. Did we?" He looked up at me and I saw my own guilt reflected in his eyes. Or did we just panic? I didn't have an answer. We sat in silence until a knock came at the door. Emma stood in the hallway looking small and lost. "I can't be alone," she said. We made room for her on one of the beds. She curled up between us like a kid, occasionally shaking with fresh sobs. None of us slept. We just lay there, staring at the water-stained ceiling, waiting for dawn. The phone rang at 5:47 a.m. Sheriff Coleman telling us the team was assembled and heading out. He said we could follow if we wanted, though he recommended we stay in town. Emma was already getting dressed before he finished talking. The convoy consisted of 2 sheriff's vehicles, a search and rescue truck, and a van from the Mining Safety Board. We followed in Mark's van. The sunrise painted the desert in shades of red and gold. Finding the town again proved harder than expected. Without the fog, the landscape looked different, and the tracks we'd followed had been partially erased by wind. But eventually, the church steeple appeared on the horizon, tilted and wrong against the morning sky. The search and rescue team was efficient, professional. They set up a command post near the house, unloaded equipment I didn't recognize. The mining safety inspector examined the cellar with a critical eye. "This isn't standard construction," she said, emerging after her initial survey. "That tunnel, it's not connected to any registered mine in our database." "Does that matter?" Emma asked desperately. "Can you get through?" Chen looked grim. "We'll try. But from what I can see, collapse is extensive and without knowing the tunnel's full structure. They worked for hours, brought in supports, drilling equipment, even a small excavator." David and I watched from a distance while Emma paced, occasionally shouting suggestions or pleas to work faster. But every report was the same. The more they dug, the more unstable the surrounding earth became. It was afternoon when Chen called Sheriff Coleman aside. I was close enough to overhear. "It's too dangerous," she said. "The whole system is compromised. We keep going. We risk triggering a larger collapse, maybe taking out the house, maybe worse." "So we leave him," Coleman said. "I'm not saying that, but we need different equipment, maybe a full mining rescue team. This is beyond what we can handle safely." Coleman found us sitting on the hotel steps, Emma between David and me. His face told us everything before he spoke. "I'm sorry," he said. "The collapse is worse than we hoped. We've managed to clear about 10 feet, but—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "We've located your friend. He's visible through a gap in the debris." Emma made a sound like all the air had been punched from her lungs. "He's gone." Coleman continued gently. "Has been for some time." "I'm sorry." "You have to get him out," Emma whispered. "We're trying, but the tunnel's extremely unstable. My team leader says continuing could trigger a catastrophic collapse. We need specialized equipment, maybe even federal resources given the unknown nature of the site." "Federal resources?" David asked. "The town's not on any current maps. The land ownership is complicated. We're not even sure whose jurisdiction this falls under." Coleman rubbed his face, looking tired. "I've made some calls, but these things take time." "How much time?" I asked. "Days, maybe weeks." Emma stood up slowly, walked to Coleman until she was inches from his face. "You're telling me," she said, her voice deadly quiet, "that you're just going to leave him down there?" "Ma'am, don't." She was screaming now. "Don't you dare stand there and tell me Mark is going to rot in that hole because of jurisdiction, because of paperwork." Coleman handled her fury with professional calm, but I saw the sympathy in his eyes. "I understand you're grieving, but I won't risk more lives. Your friend is gone. The best thing now is to let us work through proper channels." Emma slapped him. The sound cracked across the abandoned street like a gunshot. Coleman didn't react, just stood there as she collapsed against him, sobbing. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I truly am." They packed up their equipment as the sun began to set. Chen gave us her card, promised to push for resources, but her expression said she didn't hold much hope. One by one, the vehicles left, leaving us standing in the empty town with Mark still trapped below. "We can't leave him," Emma said, staring at the house. "We have to," David replied. "For now. We'll come back, Emma, with better equipment, more people." "You don't understand." She turned to us, and something in her eyes made my skin crawl. "He's not just dead down there. Something has him." "Emma," I started. You heard those sounds. You saw what was written on that wall. This place, this town, it's wrong. And now Mark is part of it. I wanted to argue, to give rational explanations, but standing there in the dying light with the empty windows of the abandoned town watching us, I couldn't. Because deep down I knew she was right. Whatever was in those tunnels, whatever had made those inhuman sounds, it had Mark now. We drove back to Elko in silence, checked into the same motel, went through the motions of ordering food no one ate. Emma sat by the window, staring out at the desert, occasionally whispering Mark's name like a prayer. That night, lying in the dark, I made a decision. We'd go home, report Mark missing to his family, let the authorities handle the recovery, and never, ever speak about what we'd really heard down there. It was the rational thing to do, the safe thing. But as I finally drifted off to sleep, I could still hear those wails bouncing up from the depths. And worse, I could swear I heard Mark's voice among them, calling for help that would never come. The drive back to Portland took 16 hours. I stopped only for gas, pushing through the exhaustion because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant seeing Mark's face in that gap again. David sat in the passenger seat, occasionally offering to drive, but I couldn't let go of the wheel. Emma hadn't spoken since we left Elko. She lay curled in the back, Mark's camera bag still held against her chest like she was holding him. Portland's skyline appeared through morning drizzle, the city waking up to another ordinary day. How could everything look so normal when our world had fundamentally broken? I dropped David at his apartment first. He paused before getting out, searching for words that didn't exist. "We should too," he started, then stopped. "I'll call you." Emma lived in the Pearl District in a converted warehouse she shared with 2 roommates. When I pulled up outside, she finally stirred. "I can't," she said, not moving. "Can't what?" "Any of it. I can't go in there and pretend. I can't call his parents. I can't." Her voice broke. "We have to tell them something." She looked at me then. Really looked at me for the first time since the collapse. "Tell them what?" "That we left their son to die in an illegal tunnel under a town that doesn't exist. That we heard things down there. That he saw something before. Tell them there was an accident," I said quietly. "That's all." She laughed, bitter and broken. "An accident?" I helped her inside, carrying Mark's gear because she wouldn't let go of his camera bag. Her roommates took one look at us, filthy, exhausted, clearly traumatized, and didn't ask questions. I left Emma in her room and drove to my own apartment in Southeast, where I sat in my car for 20 minutes before finding the strength to go inside. The call to Mark's parents was the hardest thing I'd ever done. His mother answered on the second ring, her voice bright with the expectation that her son was calling. The brightness died as I stumbled through an explanation. Cave-in. Accident. Recovery efforts ongoing. I'm so sorry. His father took the phone when she started sobbing. Former military. He asked precise questions I couldn't fully answer. Where exactly? What kind of cave? Why hadn't local authorities contacted them? I gave him Sheriff Coleman's number and hung up feeling like a coward. The funeral happened a week later on a gray Portland morning that felt appropriate. Closed casket, of course. Empty casket, though only David, Emma, and I knew that. Mark's parents had pushed the authorities, even hired a private recovery team, but the reports all said the same thing. Too unstable, too dangerous. Recovery impossible without risking more lives. I stood between David and Emma as the minister spoke about tragedy and God's plan. Emma swayed on her feet, medicated but still present. She'd lost weight in just a week, her face thin and eyes sunken. David stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, holding himself together through pure will. Mark's college friends filled the chapel. His ex-girlfriend from sophomore year, co-workers from the outdoor gear shop where he worked part-time, people who knew him as the adventurous guy, the one always planning the next trip, the next discovery. They had no idea what that adventurous spirit had finally cost him. After the service at the reception his parents insisted on hosting, I found myself cornered by Mark's cousin asking about the accident. I mumbled something about unstable ground and excused myself, escaping to the bathroom where I gripped the sink and tried not to vomit. In the mirror, my reflection looked like a stranger, hollow-eyed, haunted. The group dissolved after that. We'd been held together by Mark's gravity, and without him, we spun off in different directions. Emma stopped showing up to work at the Historical Society, stopped answering texts. Her roommate called me 2 weeks after the funeral, worried. I drove over to find Emma's room in chaos, books scattered, papers everywhere. Maps of Nevada spread across the floor with red marks circling the area where Meridian Point should be. "She hasn't slept in days," the roommate whispered. "Just sits there studying those maps, writing in that journal." I found Emma at her desk, scribbling frantically. She looked up when I entered, and for a moment didn't seem to recognize me. "I can hear him," she said. "At night he's calling for help. Emma, you need to sleep, you don't understand." She grabbed my wrist, her fingers ice cold. "He's not gone. He's still down there, but he's different, changed. In my dreams, he tells me things about what's under that town, about what took the people in 1952. I tried to get her help, called therapists, looked into grief counseling, but she refused everything, insisting she didn't need therapy. She needed to go back to find Mark to understand what had happened. A month after the accident, I went to check on her again. The apartment door was unlocked, her room empty except for a single piece of paper on the desk. Her handwriting, usually so neat, was barely legible. "I can't stay. He calls for me at night, never contact me again." Her roommates hadn't seen her leave. She'd taken nothing but her journal and research. Her phone was left behind, along with everything else that connected her to her life in Portland. I filed a missing person report. But what could I tell them? That she'd gone looking for her dead boyfriend in a town that didn't officially exist. David lasted another month before breaking. He showed up at my apartment one evening, a bottle of whiskey in hand. "I'm going home," he said without preamble. "Home?" "Barcelona. My sister's been asking me to come back for years, help with the family business." He took a long pull from the bottle. "I can't be here anymore. Every street, every coffee shop, I see him, I see us, planning trips, arguing about routes." We drank in silence for a while. Then David said, "I dream about it too. The tunnel, those sounds. Sometimes I wake up and I swear I can still hear them." "Don't," he cut me off. "Don't rationalize it. We both know what we heard down there wasn't natural, wasn't human." He left the next week, sent me one email saying he'd arrived safely, then nothing. Like Emma, he'd chosen to cut all connections to what had happened. That left me alone with the weight of it. I tried to continue normally, going to work at the tech startup where I debugged code, meeting friends for drinks, pretending everything was fine. But the pretense exhausted me. I'd find myself staring at screens full of code, seeing instead that writing on the cave wall. In meetings, I'd hear my coworkers' voices fade into that inhuman wailing. 3 months after the accident, I broke. Full panic attack in the middle of a sprint planning meeting. My manager, thankfully understanding, suggested I take some leave. The company had good mental health benefits, I should use them. Dr. Patricia Reeves specialized in trauma and grief counseling. Her office was warm, decorated with plants and soft lighting designed to put patients at ease. I told her about losing my friend in a caving accident, left out the abandoned town, the strange sounds, the feeling that something else had been down there with us, even sanitized. The story was enough. "Survivor's guilt is common in these situations," she said. "You did what you had to do to survive. That's not something to be ashamed of." But I was ashamed. Every night I saw Mark's hand reaching through that gap, heard him begging us not to leave him, saw that final moment of terror when he saw whatever was coming through the darkness. Between therapy sessions, I researched, not obsessively like Emma had, but carefully, methodically. The town was harder to find information about than it should have been. Most abandoned mining towns had some historical record, but this one seemed to have been deliberately erased. Finally, in the Nevada State Library's digital archives, I found it. Meridian Point, established 1889, abandoned October 1952. Population at abandonment, 247. The official record listed depletion of mineral resources as the reason for abandonment, but I dug deeper. Newspaper articles from nearby towns told a different story. Strange illnesses in September 1952. Unexplained sounds from the mine shafts. Children reporting voices calling them underground. Then, over 3 days in mid-October, 17 deaths. The papers called them mining accidents, but the details didn't add up. Bodies found in homes, in the streets, all showing signs of having been underground, even though they never entered the mines. The final article, dated October 20th, 1952, was just 2 paragraphs. Federal investigators had closed Meridian Point, declaring it unsafe for habitation. All remaining residents relocated. The town was to be left undisturbed. Undisturbed. We'd certainly disturbed it. 6 months after the accident, I came home to find a package on my doorstep. No return address, but the postmark said, Tucson, Arizona. Inside, wrapped in brown paper, was Emma's journal. I almost threw it away, unopened. But curiosity won. I sat at my kitchen table and read, my hands shaking more with each page. The early entries were what I expected. Grief, guilt, anger at us for leaving Mark. But as the entries progressed, they became something else. Emma described dreams that felt more like visions. Mark appearing in her room, his body broken but somehow still moving. Speaking to her in that multi-toned voice we'd heard in the tunnels, he says something took him. Not killed. Took. It's old. Older than the town. Older than humans. It lives in the spaces between, in the dark, under the earth. The miners found it in 1952, broke through into its domain. It took them, changed them, sent them back up to collect the others. Mark says it still wants us. We saw too much, went too deep. It let us go that day, but only temporarily. He says it's patient. It can wait. I see them sometimes in crowds. People who aren't quite right. Moving wrong, smiling wrong. Are they like Mark now? Hollowed out and filled with something else? The final entry was dated just 3 days before I received the package. He's not just dead. He's something else now. I understand that. I've accepted it. Maybe that's why he comes to me. Why I can hear him when you and David can't or won't. I'm going to find answers. Not in Meridian Point. That's just where it broke through. I need to go deeper, older places. Places where the barriers are thin. Don't look for me. Don't follow. Some doors once opened can never be closed. Tell David I'm sorry. Tell yourself you did the right thing. But know this. Mark is still down there and he's not alone. He's part of something vast and patient and hungry. It's waiting. I sat staring at that final line until the words blurred. Then I walked to my fireplace, crumpled the journal pages and burned them one by one. Watched Emma's words turn to ash and drift up the chimney. It felt like the only sane response to insanity, but even as the last page burned, I knew it wouldn't help. The words were already in my head, joining the images and sounds that haunted my dreams. Mark's face in the gap, the wailing from the depths, the footsteps in the darkness coming closer. I'd survived Meridian Point, but I hadn't escaped it. None of us had. We'd left Mark's body in that tunnel, but we'd carried something else out with us. Knowledge we couldn't unlearn, memories that wouldn't fade, and late at night, when sleep wouldn't come, I sometimes thought I heard it too. Mark's voice carried on the wind or repeating from storm drains, calling for help that would never come. Or maybe calling for something else entirely. Something patient. Something waiting. 3 years had passed since I'd burned Emma's journal, watching her words about patient, hungry things turn to ash in my fireplace. Chicago spread out outside my office window now, a forest of glass and steel that couldn't have been more different from Portland's laid-back sprawl. I'd taken the job at a financial tech startup 6 months after the journal arrived, needing distance from everything that reminded me of abandoned places and lost friends. My therapist in Portland had called it geographic therapy, running from trauma by changing locations. She'd warned it rarely worked, but I'd needed to try anyway. Needed to put 2,000 miles between me and the Pacific Northwest's endless forests that hid too many secrets. The move had helped, actually. Chicago was all harsh angles and purposeful movement. No room for the kind of aimless exploration that had defined my 20s. I rented a studio in River North close enough to walk to work and threw myself into debugging code and building APIs. Clean logic, predictable outcomes. Nothing like the chaos of that October day in Nevada. I'd even started taking photos again, though only of urban architecture and city life. Safe subjects that existed in full daylight, documented and mapped and known. No more creeping through broken windows seeking the abandoned and forgotten. My new camera stayed firmly pointed at the living city. The photography exhibit happened by accident. A coworker had seen my Instagram feed, carefully curated shots of Chicago's skyline, architectural details, street scenes, and mentioned her friend was curating a group show at a small gallery in Wicker Park. Emerging perspectives on urban life, she'd called it. I'd almost said no, but something about the normalcy of it appealed to me. Regular people doing regular things, no hidden doors or underground passages. Opening night was a Thursday in November. The gallery packed with the usual art crowd sipping wine from plastic cups. I stood near my section. 6 large prints of Chicago architecture shot during golden hour, trying not to look as uncomfortable as I felt. Making small talk about f-stops and composition felt surreal after everything I'd been through. "These are beautiful," a voice said beside me. I turned to find a woman studying my favorite piece, a shot of the Chicago theater sign reflected in a rain puddle. She had shoulder-length blonde hair and wore a black dress with an emerald scarf that made her eyes seem impossibly blue. "Thanks," I managed. "The reflection creates this sense of duality," she continued, tilting her head. "Like there's another city existing beneath this one." My chest tightened. I thought the same thing when I'd taken it, then tried very hard not to think about what might exist beneath cities, in the dark spaces humans weren't meant to go. "I'm Sophia," she said, extending her hand. "I work at the Art Institute Contemporary Collections." Mike, her handshake was firm, confident. I work in tech." "Just?" She smiled. "These suggest otherwise. How long have you been photographing Chicago?" "About 2 years. Since I'd arrived, since I decided to document only what existed in light." We talked for 20 minutes about photography, the city, safe topics that felt like stepping stones across dangerous water. She had an easy laugh and opinions about art that went deeper than surface looks. When she mentioned she'd love to see more of my work sometime, I surprised myself by saying yes. Our first coffee date stretched to 3 hours. Sophia was originally from Minneapolis, had studied art history at Northwestern, spent a year in Florence examining Renaissance techniques. She approached everything with intellectual curiosity, mixed with genuine warmth. When she laughed at my terrible joke about database architecture, I felt something in my chest relax, for the first time in years. We took it slow. Coffee became lunch, lunch became dinner. Dinner became long walks along the lakefront, talking about everything except the things I couldn't talk about. She didn't push when I mentioned I'd moved from Portland for a fresh start. Didn't probe when I occasionally went quiet staring at shadows. 4 months in, she invited me to the museum after hours for a private tour of a new acquisition. Walking through those empty galleries, her voice bouncing off marble floors as she explained the history of each piece, I felt safer than I had since before Meridian Point. Here was someone who understood the importance of preserving and documenting, but only things meant to be seen. "You know," she said, stopping before a contemporary installation, "you never talk about your work from before Chicago." My throat closed. "Not much to tell. You mentioned you used to explore abandoned buildings. Urban exploration, right?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "But you don't anymore." "No." She studied me with those careful curator's eyes, cataloging details. Then she took my hand. Okay. When you're ready, if you want to share, I'm here. The relief nearly knocked me over. No pushing. No demanding explanations, just acceptance that some stories took time to tell. 8 months into our relationship, I finally told her about Mark. We were in her apartment in Lincoln Park, rain pattering against the windows, when something about the sound triggered the memory of water dripping in that tunnel. I'd gone rigid on her couch, and when she asked what was wrong, it all came spilling out. Most of it, anyway. I told her about my best friend who died in a tunnel collapse during an urban exploration trip, how we'd tried to save him but the earth kept falling, how I still heard his voice sometimes when I was falling asleep, begging us not to leave him. I told her about the guilt, the therapy, the reason I'd fled Portland. I didn't tell her about the sounds that had chased us up that tunnel, didn't mention the writing on the cave wall or Emma's journal with its talk of patient, hungry things. Some truths were too heavy to share, too dangerous to speak aloud. Sophia held me while I talked, occasionally wiping tears I hadn't realized were falling. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "You did what you had to do to survive," she finally said. "That's not abandonment. That's being human. His parents had to bury an empty coffin, and if you'd stayed, they'd have had to bury you too. Would that have been better?" Logic I'd heard before, from Dr. Reeves and David in my own rational mind. But somehow, hearing it from Sophia in that rain-softened moment, I almost believed it. Our relationship deepened after that night. She understood now why I sometimes froze at construction sites when they were digging deep foundations, why I avoided the subway when possible, preferring buses or walking, why I needed lights on in the apartment, even when sleeping. She never made me feel broken for it. Instead, she adapted, kept nightlights in her hallway, suggested restaurants with outdoor seating, planned dates to museums and galleries and theaters, all above ground, all in the light. 2 years became 3, then 4. Somewhere along the way, her apartment became home in my mind. We developed routines. Saturday mornings at the farmer's market, Sunday afternoons at the Art Institute, Wednesday dinners at the Thai place that knew our order by heart. Normal life. The kind I thought I'd never have again. On our 4th anniversary, over champagne at a restaurant overlooking the river, Sophia pulled out a key. "I've been thinking," she said, and I could tell she was nervous by the way she turned her wine glass. "My lease is up next month. There's a beautiful brownstone for rent in Lincoln Park. 2 bedrooms, so you could have a proper office. Original hardwood floors, tons of light. Are you asking me to move in with you? I'm asking if you want to build something together. A real home." I thought about my small studio apartment, still feeling temporary after 4 years. Thought about waking up next to her every morning instead of just weekends. Thought about having someone there when the nightmares came. "Yes," I said. "God, yes." She laughed, that bright sound that had first drawn me to her, and kissed me right there in the restaurant. The brownstone was perfect. 2nd floor of a 3-flat with huge windows that flooded every room with light. Original 1920s details mixed with modern updates. The 2nd bedroom would indeed make a perfect office, with built-in bookshelves and eastern exposure for morning light. We moved in on a crisp October Saturday, friends helping haul boxes up the stairs. I'd accumulated more than I'd realized in 4 years. Photography equipment, books, clothes that weren't just jeans and flannels, evidence of a life rebuilt. Unpacking my office that evening, I found it at the bottom of a box I didn't remember packing. My old exploration journal, the leather cover worn soft from years of handling. I sat on the floor holding it like it might bite. I hadn't opened it since before Meridian Point. Couldn't bring myself to throw it away, but couldn't look at it either. It had traveled with me from Portland to Chicago, hidden in boxes within boxes like a secret tumor. "What's that?" Sophia asked from the doorway, carrying 2 mugs of tea. "Old journal," I said, "from before." She set the tea down and sat beside me, not touching the journal but not pulling away either. Your exploration notes? I nodded. Inside were maps, location details, photos taped to pages, all our adventures before the last one. Mark's handwriting in the margin suggesting routes, Emma's sketches of architectural details, David's historical notes in his precise script. I should throw it away. I said, "Should you?" I looked at her. It's the past. We're building a future. The past is part of you. It shaped who you are. She touched my hand gently, but if you need to let it go, I understand. I stood up with the journal and walked to the kitchen trash, stood there for a full minute. Then I lifted the lid and dropped it in. It landed with a soft thud on top of coffee grounds and takeout containers. "Okay," Sophia asked. "Yeah, I think so." We went back to unpacking, setting up our new life in rooms full of light. By evening, the place was starting to feel like home. We ordered deep dish pizza, went in Chicago and ate it on the floor of our living room surrounded by boxes. But happy. That night in our new bedroom with boxes still stacked against one wall, I dreamed of Mark for the first time in over a year. He stood at the foot of our bed, still wearing the clothes he'd died in. But something was wrong with how he looked. His body seemed twisted, bones at angles that didn't make sense. His skin had a gray cast like old meat, and his eyes were flat black, empty. His mouth moved, forming words I couldn't hear. His hands gestured frantically, pointing at something behind me. I tried to turn but couldn't move, trapped in that paralysis of nightmares. Mark's silent screaming grew more desperate, his movements more frantic. Then I noticed what was under his skin. Movement. Things moving and writhing, pushing against the surface like he was full of snakes. His mouth opened wider, impossibly wide, and I could see down his throat to darkness that went on forever. I woke, gasping, sheets soaked with sweat. Sophia stirred beside me but didn't wake. My heart hammered as I stared at the foot of the bed where Mark had stood. Empty, of course. Just boxes waiting to be unpacked, shadows from the streetlight outside. Moving stress, I told myself. The journal had stirred up old memories, that was all. I'd thrown it away, symbolically released the past. This was just my subconscious processing that action. I got up for water, padding barefoot to our new kitchen. The hardwood felt cold under my feet, still unfamiliar. I filled a glass and stood at the sink, looking out at the quiet street below. Normal neighborhood, normal night. A cat crossed the street. Someone's TV blinked in a window across the way. When I turned back, I noticed the water on the floor. A trail of wet footprints led from our front door through the living room. I followed them with my eyes, my glass trembling in my hand. They went down the hall, paused at the office door, then continued to our bedroom. My first thought was that I'd tracked them in myself, maybe stepped in something wet outside, but I'd been in bed for hours, and the prints were too large to be mine too. Wrong. The toes were too long, splayed at odd angles. I followed them to our bedroom door. Sophia was still asleep, breathing steadily. The footprints led to the foot of the bed, exactly where Mark had stood in my dream, then disappeared. No, not disappeared. They went under the bed. I stood frozen, water glass forgotten in my hand. Every rational part of my brain screamed that this was impossible. Wet footprints didn't just appear. Things didn't hide under beds except in children's nightmares. But I'd learned in Meridian Point that rational explanations weren't always the right ones. Slowly, I knelt beside the bed. My hand shook as I reached for the edge of the bedskirt. Had to look. Had to know. "Mike?" Sophia's sleepy voice made me jerk back. "What are you doing?" I stood quickly, nearly spilling the water. Thought I heard something. Just checking. She squinted at me in the dim room. "Come back to bed. It's probably just the radiator. Old buildings make weird noises." "Yeah, you're right." I climbed back into bed, pulling her close. She fell back asleep almost immediately, but I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The water glass sat forgotten on my nightstand. I tried not to think about the wet footprints I could no longer see in the dark. Tried not to think about what might be under our bed, waiting. In the morning, I told myself, I'd look. When sunlight filled the room and Sophia was awake and the world made sense again, I'd look and find nothing. Maybe some water from a leaky pipe or condensation from the radiator. A perfectly logical explanation for everything. But deep down, in the part of me that had heard inhuman wailing in those tunnels, I knew better. Knew that some doors once opened could never really be closed. Some things once seen followed you no matter how far you ran. I'd thrown away the journal, but I couldn't throw away what had happened in Meridian Point. Couldn't throw away the fact that we'd left Mark in that tunnel with something that shouldn't exist. Now, 3 years and 2,000 miles later, in a beautiful brownstone full of light and love and new beginnings, those wet footprints under our bed suggested that maybe Mark, or whatever Mark had become, hadn't stayed buried after all. 1 week after the dream, I stood in our bathroom doorway, watching Sophia at the sink, working through her nightly routine. She caught my eye in the mirror and smiled, her face half covered in some expensive cream that smelled like lavender. "You're staring," she said, reaching for a washcloth, just admiring the view. She laughed, flicking water at me. "Charmer, can you check that I locked the front door?" I can't remember if I did when we got back from dinner. I padded down the hallway, past the office where I'd been editing photos earlier. The hardwood creaked in that particular spot near the kitchen. We'd been meaning to get it fixed. Through the living room windows, Lincoln Park lay quiet under streetlights, a few late dog walkers making their rounds. The deadbolt was already turned. Of course, Sophia had locked it. She always did. I was the one who sometimes forgot, too used to small-town Portland where nobody locked anything. I turned to head back when the doorbell rang. 11:38 p.m. The green numbers on the microwave caught my eye as I passed the kitchen. Who the hell would be ringing our bell this late? "Probably Gary," Sophia called from the bathroom. Our downstairs neighbor had locked himself out twice in the past month, both times after what he called networking events at the bar down the street. Tell him he really needs to hide a spare key somewhere. I flipped the porch light on and peered through the peephole. The fisheye lens distorted everything, but I couldn't see anyone on the landing. Maybe kids playing pranks, though it was pretty late for that. I undid the deadbolt and opened the door. The landing was empty. Cold October air rushed in, carrying the smell of dead leaves and something else. Something like wet copper and earth. My hand tightened on the doorknob. "Hello?" Movement at the edge of the porch light's reach. A figure stepped forward from the shadows by the stairs, moving wrong. The gait was off, stuttering, uneven, like someone walking on broken bones. Then the figure moved fully into the light and my legs nearly gave out. Mark. But not Mark. Not anymore. His body was wrong, twisted at angles that made my eyes water trying to process them. One shoulder sat higher than the other. The whole torso canted sideways like his spine had been rearranged. His clothes, the same flannel and jeans he'd worn that day, hung in tatters caked with dirt and darker stains. The visible skin had gone gray, the color of old meat left too long in the back of a fridge. His face was the worst part. Still recognizably Mark's features, but slack, empty. His eyes were flat black, no whites visible, no life behind them. Just two holes that seemed to drink in the porch light. "You left me," he said. The voice came from his throat, but it wasn't his voice. It was multiple tones speaking at once, Mark's voice layered with others, harmonizing in ways human vocal cords couldn't produce. The sound made my teeth ache. I slammed the door through the deadbolt, backed away until I hit the wall behind me. This wasn't happening. Couldn't be happening. Mark was dead, buried under tons of rock in Nevada. I'd been to his funeral, watched them lower an empty casket into the ground. The door swung open, not kicked in, not forced. It simply opened like the deadbolt wasn't there, like the wood was just a suggestion. Mark stepped into our apartment. Each footfall left a mark, dirt mixed with something black and viscous that moved on its own. Crawling away from his footprints like living oil, the smell got stronger, decay and copper and something chemical that burned my nostrils. "Mike?" Sophia's voice from the bathroom. "Who was it?" I couldn't answer, couldn't move. Mark tilted his head at an angle that would have snapped a living person's neck, studying me with those empty black eyes. "You left me in the dark," he said in that awful chorus voice. But the dark was already full. Under his skin, things moved, pushed against the surface like fingers trying to find a way out. His face rippled. Features moved slightly as whatever was inside rearranged itself. A bulge traveled up his neck, changing the shape of his throat before disappearing behind his jaw. "What are you?" The words came out as a whisper. "I'm your friend." His mouth moved wrong around the words, like he was still learning how to work it. "Your friend who you left to die." But I didn't die, Mike. I became. Sophia came into the hallway, still patting her face dry with a towel. "Seriously, who?" The towel fell from her hands. The scream that tore from her throat was pure, primal terror. She pressed back against the wall, eyes wide, unable to look away from the thing wearing Mark's body. "Hello?" Mark said, turning that horrible attention to her. "You must be the new girlfriend, the one who helped him forget." "Sophia." "Run," I managed to say. "Get out, now." But she couldn't move, frozen like a deer caught in headlights. Mark took a step toward me, then another. Each movement was jerky, unnatural, like a puppet controlled by someone who didn't know what they were doing. More of that black substance dripped from him, pooling on our hardwood floor. "The tunnel went deeper than you knew," he said, "connected to places older than the town, older than humans. The miners in 1952 broke through into its domain. It had been waiting so long, so hungry. It took them first, made them its vessels, sent them up to collect the others." Another step. I could see now that parts of him were still crushed, still bearing the damage from the cave-in, ribs pushed through tears in his shirt at wrong angles. One arm bent in too many places, but whatever animated him didn't care about the body's limitations. "It's patient," Mark continued. "It can wait decades between feedings. But you three, you four, you came right to it, delivered yourselves like an offering. It only needed one at first, to test, to taste, to learn. You're not Mark." I pressed harder against the wall, wishing I could phase through it. "Mark's dead." "Yes." That terrible smile again. Mark died screaming in the dark, feeling it crawl inside him, reshape him, make him useful. But his memories are still here. His love for you, his trust. The trust you betrayed when you let go of his hand. The lights flashed on and off. The overhead fixture in the hallway dimmed, brightened, dimmed again. In the flashing light, Mark's body seemed to change, showing glimpses of something else underneath. Something vast and dark and patient. "Now it wants the rest of you," he said. "The ones who saw too much, who know about the door we opened." Emma understood first. She came looking for me, following the dreams I sent her. David took longer, but Barcelona wasn't far enough to run. "No." The word came out cracked. They got away. Emma disappeared. David went home. David came home. A new voice said from behind Mark. The front door still hung open. Two more figures stood on the landing, silhouetted against the porch light. They moved forward with that same broken gait, and my legs finally gave out. I slid down the wall as David and Emma entered our apartment. David's academic appearance was gone, replaced by something that had crawled out of nightmares. His skin had the same gray color. His clothes, different from what he'd worn in Nevada, were stained with dirt and darker things. One lens of his glasses was cracked, the eye behind it solid black. His head hung at an odd angle, neck clearly broken, but still supporting the weight. Emma was worse. Her body moved like a dancer's, but wrong. Each gesture too smooth, too graceful, inhuman. Her hair hung in matted clumps, and when she smiled, I saw her teeth had been replaced by something else. Something that looked like black glass. "Hello, Mike," David said. his voice carrying that same multi-tonal quality. Barcelona was lovely, but the thing below found me anyway. It's everywhere, you see. Waiting under every city, every town, all the deep places connect if you go down far enough. Emma tilted her head, studying Sophia with those empty eyes. She's pretty, alive, full of light. It will enjoy draining that. The lights went out completely. In the total darkness, I heard Sophia cry out. A short, sharp sound cut off too quickly. Then silence, except for breathing that came from too many throats in rhythms that didn't match human lungs. Sophia. I pushed off the wall, stumbling forward, hands out in the darkness. My fingers found nothing but empty air. A hand closed around my wrist. Cold. Too cold. With too many joints. Time to go, Mike. Mark's coarse voice said directly in my ear. Time to go down. Time to join us in the dark where you left me, where you left all of us. More hands grabbed me, pulled me. I fought, struggling against grips that felt like iron wrapped in rotting flesh. In the darkness, I could hear them moving, surrounding me, could smell the earth and rot and something chemical that made my head spin. Sophia. I screamed her name, but only silence answered. Then Mark's voice again, so close I could feel the wrongness of his breath on my face. She'll join us soon. Everyone does, eventually. But first you need to understand. Need to see what you condemned me to. What waits below every place humans think is safe. The hands pulled harder, dragging me toward the door. Or maybe toward somewhere else. In the absolute darkness, direction lost meaning. I could hear Emma humming, a tuneless sound that seemed to come from multiple throats within her body. Could hear David whispering in languages that came before human speech. My feet found no purchase on the floor. The hands lifted me, carried me, and I realized with growing horror that we were going down. Not downstairs, not down to the street, down in ways that shouldn't exist in a second-floor apartment. Down to where patient things waited in the dark, down to where Mark had been waiting for 3 years to show me what I'd left him to become.